Welcome to a special two-part edition of What Lurks Beneath. I'm your curator. I bring fresh tales of the supernatural every other day that you can only find here. Tales like the one featured tonight. I commissioned a local author and investigator of the supernatural to carry out an ongoing expedition of a local area steeped in lore around where I live. Washington State author Jacob Zappi, writer of the book Northwest Mythology, has been featured on my channel now several times. A link to his book can be found in the description if you want to check out some of his other investigations and lore that he has dug up about his local area. You can also check out the previous videos I made in his book in the description below. I reached out to Jacob to investigate the Ape Caves located near Mount St. Helens in southern Washington. I chose this location because it has significant meaning to me. As a child, my family would spend time camping, swimming, and exploring this area. The names of the places always seemed strange. I had heard local rumors of origins, but I wanted to see what Jacob could drudge out from the dark places of this location. I first commissioned him for only one video. However, he uncovered so many strange secrets during the course of his investigation that they had been split into several parts. He has composed a very thorough report on the Ape Caves and Ape Canyon, as well as the surrounding areas. If you like what you hear, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button, click that like button, and turn on your notifications. This support helps with the YouTube algorithm so I can continue to fund investigations into the supernatural locations just like the one you're listening to. If you want to support Jacob's writing, make sure you pick up a copy of his book. Without further ado, let's jump into this investigation. All investigations must start with thorough research. Jacob had heard rumors about the Ape Caves located in Cowlitz County, Washington for years. Cowlitz County is located in the southern part of Washington state. It is home to many strange occurrences and holds the legendary Mount St. Helens within its boundaries. Mount St. Helens was home to the biggest eruption in modern history on May 18, 1980. This devastated most of that region. It killed 57 and caused the equivalent of billions of dollars in damage to the local communities. Now, prior to the eruption, the local Cowlitz tribe already considered the mountain and area very sacred. They called the mountain Lawatlala, which translates as smoker. They had legends that stated the area was occupied by spirits. They would go on a spirit quest to the area, and on these quests they would try to retrieve sacred knowledge from supernatural beings, including what we would call Sasquatch today. Not only people were said to have died in the explosion of the mountain in the 1980s, but reports abound from local eyewitnesses that claim to have seen corpses of Sasquatch littered in the devastation while searching for survivors. After seeing these charred giant corpses, the locals reported that government officials would converge on the scene and secure the area. The locals would get pushed out of sight while demanding answers on what kind of creatures they were witnessing. Black helicopters were said to have flown in with massive cargo nets to carry off all and any evidence. Jacob has read and heard of this happening in at least 3 different locations around the mountain. Before the eruption, the immediate area around Mount St. Helens was one of the hottest locations for all Sasquatch encounters. One of the more famous Sasquatch encounters happened on the mountain in an area called Ape Canyon. This story was published in local papers and all the witnesses were deemed credible. It occurred in July 1924. The story goes that 5 miners were prospecting in the area, and one of them was said to have wandered off. He claimed that he saw a hairy ape-like man on a ridge and he had scared it off. Well, he returned to the cabin with the other miners that night. And when it was dark, they were besieged by a bombardment of boulders from all directions. At one time, they claimed a giant ape-like hand had reached into the cabin to grab things. They fought off the hairy appendage that seemed to be reaching for an axe. The miners fired guns in all directions throughout the night, but the bombardment continued until daybreak. The miners decided that they then needed to make a break for it and get off the mountain now. As they were making their retreat, one of the miners actually claimed to have seen one of these beasts standing on a ridge. He says that he took a shot and struck the beast. The prospectors corroborated his story and said they witnessed the beast fall into the deep gorge. Now, a few days later, the miners had reached civilization and reported their story together. They were able to round up a posse and reporters to follow them up to the battle site. When they got up there, they found the cabin completely ransacked. But what was missing was the corpse that was said to have fallen into the valley, and even any traces of the beast's blood that they thought they had hit it on a few occasions. After this incident, the prospectors gave up their claims in that area. It was said that it was not the only incident in the area of beast attacks. Also, many prospectors that were less prepared never were seen again. Ape Canyon is only about 4 to 6 miles as the crow flies to the Ape Caves. Both of these areas were known to local tribes as having wild men of the woods inhabiting them. They had warned miners multiple times and settlers of the dangers that these creatures could possibly pose. It was well known to the tribes at the time that the creatures liked to make their homes in large caverns. It was said that they would roll large boulders in front of cave mouths as makeshift doors. In fact, one of the well-known inhabited caves was the Ape Caves. Official lore says that the cave was named by a local Boy Scout troop. It was discovered in 1947 by a local logger that had heard rumors from local tribal members. He did not explore it, however, as he was said to have been frightened by what lurked in its depths. He passed it along and rumors reached the Boy Scout troop leader. And in the 1950s, they were said to have also named it after the troop's sponsor, St. Helens Apes. This was a group of foresters that used the name as their mascot. The term came from an old nickname of Sasquatch that they would use locally, brush apes. Many of the foresters had encountered the apes while surveying for local logging companies. Now, the caves are very impressive. They are the third largest lava tubes in the United States and measure almost 2.5 miles. Lava tubes are rare occurrences that happen when the outside cools first. This makes a natural pipe that lava flows through. It can make miles of networks that appear as almost perfect tunnels. And these types of tunnel systems have been known for thousands of years to be the secret domains of Sasquatch and many other creatures. They could travel far distances using this underground highway system. And the Sasquatches were said to enhance the natural caves to make them more hospitable. They would make secret doors and tunnels leading to other areas. None of the Boy Scouts had any reports of Sasquatch in this section of caves. However, the whole area is riddled with cave systems. Some of them have not been explored. Although Sasquatch encounters are a lot more infrequent after the eruption, they are still a regular occurrence. And as a matter of fact, most of the activity has actually shifted to Mount Adams, which is just about 33 miles away. Potentially, some of the families of Mount St. Helens Sasquatch could have survived the eruption by seeking shelter in these underground sanctuaries, maybe. Although many perished, a few pockets still lurk in some of the unexplored isolated areas. These might still be connected to the ape caves by carefully concealed passages. An 800-pound semi-intelligent primate could potentially slide a boulder or remove a false wall, much bigger than humans would think possible. While conducting research for this report, Jacob was curious if there was any precedence for large apes living in caves. Turns out there is. Gigantopithecus, Blackie, was the largest known primate to have ever lived. They were said to have gone extinct 100,000 years ago and lived around the time of our ancestors Homo erectus. Their known habitat was boreal forest, much like the ones located around the PNW, or Pacific Northwest if you're not from here. Males were known to grow much larger than females. An adult male was estimated to grow from around 8 to 12 feet tall and weigh from 600 to even 1,000 pounds. The females were significantly smaller. What is truly interesting, though, is that they were suspected to have roamed in some form or another on all continents. The only remains have ever been found in caves in China. The speculation is that any remains that died outside the cave were consumed for nutrients by other prehistoric creatures, supposedly. However, many people believed, and there is a sect of people that believe this, that Gigantopithecus may have been more clever than they have been given credit for. They may have buried their dead in specific burial grounds, and some skull fragments found indicated that their brains developed much more like humans than apes. They could have made simple weapons and tools as well, based on their comparable brain size to our supposed distant ancestors doing the same thing at the time. These giant factual apes have been long hypothesized to be true legend behind Sasquatch. But what do you think? Is that true, or is it false? Although one has never been documented as being alive, there are some important facts to keep in mind. Like gorillas. They were not verified until the 1920s, and prior to this, they were thought to be just legends. This giant squid was also not verified in gargantuan size until around 2004. Keep in mind that Gigantopithecus may be as intelligent or maybe even more than Homo erectus. Homo erectus was known to use tools, live in tribes, and have a social hierarchy. What if Gigantopithecus does not want to be found? It has seen what humans are capable of and wants no part of us. There are also literally hundreds of sightings each year that best fits this giant ape's description. Also, I would hypothesize that our government knows about them to at least some degree. The national parks serve as a type of reservation for these creatures, and as long as humans stay in the designated areas, they have little to fear. Off-path explorations can and will lead to encounters. That's just how it is. Now that the official research is explained, a quick backstory about why Jacob chose to accept this commission for an investigation. Usually, he does not do commissions as having experience can take several visits. He had heard of the Ape Canyon years ago while reading obscure books about Washington history. He believes that it was an account of the Ape Canyon attack, the book that mentions something he cannot find on the internet, and which book he read it in has been lost to the far recesses of his mind. But it is said that the Ape Cave and the Ape Canyon more or less had native myths associated with Sasquatch in the area. Now, fast forward several years, and he had a planned trip to Lewis Falls. He was driving to Lewis Falls Camp for a few days and saw signs for the ape caves. He mentioned this to some friends of his about the legends that they had read about the area, and they did not have time to stop because they had already planned a couple of full days to explore the river. On that trip, the sheer amount of wilderness in the area was staggering to him. There is no local park. There are hundreds to thousands of miles of the deepest forest that you can imagine. Mile after mile of dense, dark foliage. Scattered throughout the dense brush are unseen gullies and caves. They camped on that trip and had a great time with no unexplained encounters. The only thing that was creepy was the feeling that is often present when camping in the deep woods with only a few people around. You get this invading sense that you are an unwelcome visitor to this realm. Maybe this previous link to the region would provide a catalyst for an encounter for him. Now, a few years later, Jacob was exploring another potential investigation spot around his house when his friend had mentioned wanting to visit the ape caves. Further, his friend had brought a non-believer with him that claimed he hunted the area all around Mount St. Helens and had never had any Sasquatch sighting. He claimed to not believe in cryptids at all. But he then went on to tell a story about how he was hunting in the same area by himself when he claims he had heard whispering in the deep woods. He claimed that it sounded like a young female child. He even shouted, "Hello, is anyone here?" but received no answer. He began to follow the voice deeper into the woods, and as he went, he got more and more freaked out when he could not find anyone. Eventually, he had the feeling he was being led somewhere by a spirit. He returned to his camp. The other hunters that he was with shared a similar story to his, and by this time, they were all freaked out as they were hunting in different locations miles apart. They all agreed that they no longer wanted to stay the night in the area, so they packed up their camp and left for the night. Jacob thought this was a weird story for a non-Sasquatch believer to have, but assured him that wandering spirits in the woods were much more believable than wandering cryptids. Now, the next week after this incident, Jacob received an email from a reader that had a possible lead on a possible investigation spot called ECETI Ranch. This ranch was located on Mount Adams and is a mere 30 miles away from Mount St. Helens and the Ape Caves. Based on their website, this ranch's owner claims to be in contact regularly with both aliens and Sasquatch. He thought it looked like a neat place and marked it in his brain as a location to visit sometime during the summer. Now, a few days later, Jacob would receive an email from me, What Lurks Beneath, asking him to do an investigation into the ape caves. Jacob quickly agreed. Coincidence time was over for him, and trip planning time had now gotten underway. Something was calling him to investigate the region. Jacob had planned the trip for 2 days at the start of the week on a Monday and Tuesday. One of the key things to remember when investigating mysteries is that you don't want interlopers in the area. They can bring unwanted energy or not fully understand everything that is going on. He sent out the camping invite to his usual rogues gallery of conspirators to see who can make the trip. While waiting for responses, he set a reservation time for 1 p.m. to explore the ape caves. After an investigation, the protocols to visit, a time reservation was required. He did not think that this was a good sign to have an encounter, as that meant to him the caves must be very busy. He heard back from 2 of his friends. One was a workout buddy who was in great shape. The other one used to work out with them but was still in decent shape. Both of them were teachers, so they are intelligent. He has been on investigations with both of them in the past, and neither one gets frightened easily, and they usually bring good positive energy to an expedition. They both also enjoy firearms and carry them almost on every hiking trip. Jacob does not think guns would do much to a Sasquatch, but they might come in handy if they ran into bears or mountain lions while exploring more remote locations. They set out on a clear, hot morning that was supposed to be one of the hottest days so far this summer. The drive down the state from where Jacob lives is just a little over 3 hours, and it leads to the small town of Cougar, Washington. They stopped at a local hotel. This was an easy choice as it was Bigfoot themed. It had 2 carvings in the front of the cryptid. One of them was more cartoonish, making Sasquatch into a silly caricature. The other one was more serious and had Sasquatch looking like a wise sage or wizard. Also, next to these was a tour bus painted in a Sasquatch motif. On the side was a claim that promised nightly encounters. They knew that this looked like a promising spot to obtain some serious intel on recent Sasquatch encounters. When Jacob accepted this investigation, he was not sure that he would be able to gather enough material for a very interesting story. He knew that he would have to talk with locals and gather intel to find good spots to investigate. And with the Bigfoot theme, this seemed like it would be a great place to start. They entered the restaurant and gift store, and the gift store was filled with all sorts of Sasquatch memorabilia. Jacob had selected a green Sasquatch bandana to have an excuse to talk with the young lady working at the cash register in hopes that she would share or have some sort of recent story. As he was purchasing this banana, he steered the conversation towards Sasquatch and any local strangeness that she had heard about. She said that she did not know of any and had just recently moved there a few months ago. He thanked her for her time and asked her about the food and restaurant. Now, after eating, a middle-aged woman with black hair was their waitress. They ordered some food and some drinks and will carry on some talk about their next steps. Jacob and his friends also struck up a conversation with the waitress and inquired if she had any knowledge of local encounters or strange happenings. She also said that she had recently moved to the area from the East Coast and had not gotten out much to explore. This was not a good sign for them as they only had met 2 people, both of which claimed to have no stories and claimed to have just moved into the area. Jacob and his friends now speculated that perhaps they were getting railroaded because they were not locals themselves. After eating, they gathered in the parking lot around the friend's truck, who drove to formalize a plan for the next spot. Jacob recalled that the year before, when visiting the nearby Lewis Falls, he had seen a shop a little further into the mountains with a Bigfoot mural cut out attached to it. They all agreed that this should be their next stop and headed out. On the way, they passed the Swift Reservoir. The only reason why Jacob mentions it is that he found it very strange. It had a huge building attached to it that said it was used to make hydroelectricity. That alone would not lead him to jump to wild speculation, but it also had several areas throughout that were heavily fenced and surveyed. Side roads would lead to massive militarized gates requiring card access to enter. To the layperson, this might not seem very strange, but these facilities are in a very remote area. Jacob is sure a normal gate with no trespassing sign would have been sufficient. Having a military background, this reeked of a top-secret location to Jacob. He did not see any armed guards, but suspected they were about monitoring the many cameras he saw hidden in the area. They followed the signs to the Eagle Cliff store and a campground, and the mural on the side of the wood-cutting shed was very strange. It was of 2 children looking strange while eating ice cream, while a Sasquatch spied on them from the forest. Jacob had a strange feeling about the mural, but was not sure what to make of it. A black plywood cutout of an 8-foot-tall Sasquatch was also secured to the front of the store. They entered the store and were greeted by a young man in his early 20s. As Jacob began to look around the store, he noticed a large plaster cast of a Sasquatch print secured to the wall. It was roughly 18 inches in length and approximately 8 inches across. The print was very well done, and it was obvious something with 5 toes had made it. They inquired to the store clerk about the history of the track, and he admitted that he had no idea. and claimed that the current owner had only purchased the store a few months prior. He claimed that he had also just moved to the area. And of course, now red flags were going off in Jacob's head, like that of the 3 locals they had talked to, so far all of them had just moved to the area. And they had asked him about Sasquatch and if anyone had recently had encounters or any sightings. He told them he had heard that someone had seen some strange snap trees right around Bear Meadow and gave directions on how to get there. The friends bought a few snacks and thanked him for the tips and headed out in the directions they thought would lead them to Bear Meadow. After 10 miles, Jacob began to recognize the way as the same road that would take them to Lewis Falls. The friend driving pulled over so they could closely examine the map, and they determined that they had turned out the wrong way when leaving the store and had to head back in the other direction. Jacob's friend who was driving, Joe, completed about a 20-point turn in the narrow road to get them going back in the right direction. 5 or so miles down the road and something caught Jacob's eye, and he told his friend to stop. Joe would slam his truck and park, and they all jumped out to investigate what he had seen. It was a tree just off the road. About 8 feet off the ground, a big chunk had been ripped out. It looked like it had been done recently, as fresh sap was still oozing from the wound. The friends discussed what could have done it and why. Joe, who had been on the driver's side, suggested that maybe a lifted truck had somehow gone off the road and struck the tree. They all agreed that was a pretty preposterous hypothesis. Jacob conjectured that it looked like a Sasquatch was seeking to make his territory. Maybe this tree marked a path or a boundary at some point, and they started to investigate the surrounding area. Their search did not yield any results. A car came while they were searching, and as the road was so narrow, had many blind curves, then they began to worry that they could be in danger of getting struck by a passing vehicle. The intervals that vehicles passed were sparse. However, they would not be expecting people to be walking in the road in this location. The friends agreed that they would explore this area more if Bear Meadows did not yield better results. The friends drove for several hours in the right direction on many winding roads to search the area around Bear Mountain. A few things caught Jacob's eye on the way up, and they stopped to check them out. The first was a road named Sasquatch Lane. It is said no trespassing and under surveillance, but the gate was open. Jacob wants to reiterate that this is a random road in the middle of several hundred miles of dense mountainous forest. They drove up the road and saw many beautiful lots cut out of the forest ready to be developed. The friends drove a little further and came to a modest mansion, complete with what appeared to be an off-grid solar panel station. They waved to the workers and turned around, and it looked as if a whole off-grid community was getting built to accommodate rich elites to live in just case a worse scenario happened. Now, the second strange thing they saw on the way up were 3 large logs tied into a group of trees. They were tied 8 or 10 feet off the ground, and each log was about 12 inches in diameter and 15 feet long. They were tied into the trees in a roughly an I shape. The rope used to lash them to the trees was a hodgepodge of some cordage. Some were tow strap material, while some appeared to be pink survey ribbons. The best answer they could devise was this random structure was used by hunters to skin deer and elk. However, no old blood or animal parts were detectable. The other conclusion they came to was maybe it was a winter shelter. A tarp secured over the top would provide protection from the elements. One thing was agreed upon, that someone or something had put in some effort to secure the logs that high up into the tree. The friends continued towards Bear Meadow without any further incidents out of the ordinary. As Bear Meadow is a rather popular place, they deduced that it would not be the ideal site to make a camp if they wanted to have an encounter. With this in mind, they began to look for random side roads to investigate potential camping areas. Joe, that was driving, was a little annoyed with Jacob that he had not done more research and did not have a solid plan. Jacob explained to him that when doing supernatural investigations, you have to let feelings and randomness kind of guide your decisions. A plan will often not lead to an encounter, but following intuition will. And not 5 minutes after having this conversation, Joe told the other friends that he had a feeling and needed to turn down a logging road coming up. Jacob thought that maybe he was just being facetious. He told them that not every intuition can prove correct and that it can be discouraging when they are not correct. The friends had only gone about a mile or 2 down the road when they arrived at an interesting sight. A group of about 4 saplings had been snapped 4 feet off the ground. These were not a couple feet high trees, but if standing, each would be about 30 feet high. The The Forest Service had hastily cut a path through them so vehicles could still access the road, but it warranted further investigation. When looking at snapped trees for suspicious activity, you have to look at the surrounding area. Windy weather or snow can easily snap trees in an area. To tell if it is from natural occurrence, you must look at the surrounding area. Other than those 4 trees that had been used as a makeshift roadblock, the rest of the forest looked normal. They climbed up the bank to where the stumps of the trees were located for a closer look, and one of these stumps is where they found a set of 2 prints. One was clearly a left foot, and one was a right. They could tell because of the big toe indentations on each foot. Not only did it have a big toe, but 4 little toes on each foot. A palm and a heel of the feet were also easily visible. This is the first time that Jacob has ever seen tracks this clear. Each toe was visible. If they had casting material, they could have easily made a cast to rival the one they had seen at the store. Their friends talked about leaving and getting casting material, but the nearest store that would have plaster was well over an hour away one way. They took pictures the best they could, but they did not do the prints justice. Jacob placed his size 13 boot next to the print. It was easily 5 inches longer as well as several inches thicker. The prints were aligned in such an orientation that you could see where the Sasquatch that had made them had planted their feet so they could snap the saplings to block the road. The friends found more prints similar, if not as well defined, by the mangled stump of each sapling. They also could see where the creatures had made a path through broken ground and foliage leading up the hill. As they were following them up, Jacob came across a strange handprint in a soft soil area. The fingers were much longer and thicker than his own when he laid his hand on them. It was like a 3-year-old child placing their hand in an adult palm. Jacob's friends were skeptical it was a handprint as no thumb was present by the fingers. He showed them where the thumb indentation was. It was just lower on the wrist, just as it would be on a gorilla or another large primate. The thumb would have been at least 2 inches thick. Jacob doesn't know how to make a plaster cast or if the footprints or handprint would have turned out, but he has never wanted to plaster more in his life. The friends continued to scurry up the hill until they reached the top and the tracks suddenly stopped in a less dense area. They looked around for several minutes, hoping they could pick it up again, and the friends all eventually agreed that they had lost the track and should return to the truck. After reaching the truck, they thought all this was a good sign that this road was leading them in the right direction and should continue on. They came to another block in the road, about a mile away. This one was more recent and had not been cleared by forest workers. This was a massive tree that had been pushed down from below. Only the top was blocking the road. Now this is strange that it did not fall down the slope when it fell. It looked like it had fallen in the wrong direction. The group was able to bypass this obstruction by putting the truck in 4-wheel drive and going partially onto an embankment. Finally, about a mile after that, they had to admit defeat. A huge log was right in the road. The 3 of them had no hope to move it. If they had a chainsaw, they would have to cut it up to proceed. Their friends all agreed that this was a good time to turn around. They had seen a meadow not far after a scenic lookout of Mount St. Helens. It was within easy walking distance, and this lookout would make a great vantage point of the valley below and provide a great stargazing access. They began to make camp in the meadow and make an evening meal. Now, shortly after the trio had finished eating and drank a couple of beers, the plan was to make their way back to the viewpoint. Right around dusk, they had heard something coming from the direction where they had found the tracks and broken trees. It is hard to describe these sounds. Jacob has heard other vocalizations before, but these ones he had never heard. They were like 2 people yelling at each other a distance apart, but the yelling did not sound quite human. Whatever was making these yells had some kind of vocal cords, but the sounds were not quite in the range a human could make. The first wrong thing was that they were too loud. Because of the echoes, you could tell they were coming from at least a half-mile away. But the yells were much louder than they should have been. They also seemed to be 2 different yells answering each other. It was kind of a, yeah, yeah, followed by this, a brief silence, then an answer in a similar yell from a different location. Their friends listened to this for around 20 minutes. They briefly talked about trying to track down these yells, but it was still early and they seemed to be getting further and further away from the campsite. Jacob wants to mention again that this is no campground. They were camped on a side road and had not seen anyone else for literally hours. One of their friends did try to record the sounds, but his cell phone did not pick up the sounds well. This happens often. Jacob doesn't know what it is about cell phone recordings, but they do not pick up ambient sound well at all. Now, shortly after this, they decided to start walking to the lookout point. It was only about a half a mile walk, and it was getting dark very fast. Both Jacob's friends brought their sidearms. He is not convinced that these are the best tools to fight a creature that may be all or partially in the spirit realm. Jacob had a can of bear spray and a knife that was handcrafted and given to him as a gift by a loved one. Historically, only an enchanted weapon could harm a creature, not entirely of the physical realm. Since the techniques for making an enchanted weapon have been lost to the sands of time, this is the closest thing he could think of. A knife forged by hand by a master blacksmith. Followed by this, it was a hand engraved with a message from his wife and then given with love. If that cannot imbue enchantments to defend against attacking supernatural creatures, Jacob is not sure what. He has heard of guns doing nothing to these creatures. He has never heard of an enchanted weapon from Viking sagas failing. Swords given by a loved one has been told to be able to even slay a dragon. Now, about halfway to the viewpoint, they passed another unmarked logging road to the right, and a short distance past, Jacob noticed something on the road as they were a good distance above the road and running parallel to it. He let his friends know that they needed to make their way through the forest about 100 yards to get what he had seen. It was some kind of mangled metal. They carefully made their way down to discover a mangled gate. It was made from metal poles about 2 or 3 inches thick. It had been mostly ripped off of its hinges, but the bars had also been bent at angles that would not be congruent with being hit by a motor vehicle. It looked like something strong had bent it at several angles using its hands or other appendages. Some of the bars were bent one way while others were bent in a complete opposite direction. If a vehicle had run through it, they would all presumably be bent in the direction of the impact. By this time, the friends were all feeling the strangeness of the area. Jacob had talked to his friends about energy protection, and if they began to get scared, Sasquatch may become more violent toward them in an effort to drive them from the area. If they maintained composure, they would most likely leave them alone, and the friends may be able to have a chance encounter. Now, both of the friends have been on numerous investigations with Jacob. They said they were feeling okay, and neither one claimed to be afraid, even though he could see them with their hands on their guns. Jacob told them that Sasquatch was said to have the ability to read emotions and possibly minds. If they had a scared mindset, it would taint the entire experience. The group walked back up to the main road and continued without incident to the viewpoint. At the viewpoint, they had only one strange encounter. This was not Sasquatch related. As they watched, a blue light started to fly sporadically in the sky. It would fly quickly in a zigzag pattern, then fly straight up and down. It had to be moving at incredible speed. It was not a plane and was moving much faster than any fighter jet Jacob has ever seen. He used to be stationed on a naval air station and would watch flight operations on a nightly basis. This moved several times faster than any jet he had witnessed in his 3 years stationed there. They watched it move all over the sky for an hour or more before it disappeared behind the mountain. Now, after the craft left, the friends decided that it was time to head back to camp and have a fire. They agreed they should walk the half mile with no lights in an attempt to have a chance encounter. Unfortunately, this did not work. Joe had made a comment that he was not scared because he was going to tag a Bigfoot if one showed themselves. Jacob reprimanded him and said now they probably had no chance of seeing one. Once they sense those bad intentions, they are not going to show themselves. Jacob explained that thousands of people have tried to hunt them. Sasquatch could sense the intentions of the hunters, so they would never show themselves. Even though Joe is a believer, he thinks the Sasquatch is just an animal and not a spiritual being. When they got back to camp without incident, Jacob told him it was because of his comment and energy. Joe said Jacob did not know everything and was still convinced that he was going to get a chance to shoot a Sasquatch and bring a body back into town. The rest of the night passed with little to no incidents, and Jacob's other 2 friends thought they had heard sounds behind the campsite and even went to investigate. Jacob already knew his trigger-happy friend had jinxed the rest of the evening and settled down around the fire. They went and investigated for 10 minutes and returned without seeing anything. Now, shortly after, a little annoyed by his friends, he went to bed. He is not sure when his friends came to bed, but it could have been much later. Jacob was awakened at night around the witching hour. He does not know what it was, but something big was in the woods behind the camp, and he could hear it breathing heavily and pushing through the underbrush. His friends had fallen asleep with their guns next to them. He did not want to wake them and have them start shooting randomly into the bush, and so he listened to whatever was outside poke around for several moments, then it retreated into the forest. Jacob tried to peek, but it was far too dark. No moon was out to provide any real illumination, so once he had heard it retreat into the woods, he just decided to go back to sleep for a few more hours. That is the end of night 1 of Jacob's investigation. The second part will be out soon. Will Jacob and his friends find anything interesting at the Ape Caves or Ape Canyon? Will they finally find hard evidence of Sasquatch's existence? Imagine if you were camping in a remote area and hearing strange sounds, finding prints. What would you do? Leave a comment below, letting the community know what you think you would do in a situation like Jacob and his friends had found themselves in. And while you're at it, make sure to go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed what you heard. Should I offer to send Jacob and his crew to investigate more spots in Washington? If you have any ideas of your own, drop them in the comments below. And make sure you stay tuned for part 2 of this investigation as it is ongoing. As always, guys, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the next video.